Going live. All right. Hello, and welcome to my very first live stream. This is the first time that I've ever streamed something before, so hopefully everything is working okay. Today I'm going to be working on two different icon animations. I have this notebook and the eyedropper. Two very fun and exciting things. And yeah, I feel like this is not working with my video correctly, but maybe it is. Okay. Yeah, cool. Please bear with me. It seems like there's a lag here between what I'm seeing in my feed and what I'm doing. So, anyway, it looks like everything's good. Forget the last minute. Here we are, starting with my notebook and eyedropper animations. Thank you, Peter, for joining. And so I don't know which one I want to do first. And let me show you, I've got some storyboards here. So for this eyedropper animation, I have this first iteration. There's going to be a pool of color, then the eyedropper comes down and kind of sucks up some of the liquid and then rotates to this final position. The next version I have using a square, because you gotta switch it up every now and then, you know. And the eyedropper is going to come out of that square with the color and then rotate into, again, this final position. For the notebook, we have some spirals drawing in and more rotating happening. And then the strap kind of, I imagine it kind of like snapping on into the final frame, which is just this notebook. And then the second iteration for that, I'm going to try to have the notebook open up and some pages flip. This is going to be fun because I don't have the pages set up within the files that I reorganized in Illustrator. So to do the pages, I'll have to create more shapes within After Effects, which can sometimes be a little weird. But in any case, so we have the eyedropper and the notebook. I don't know which one I want to start with. Maybe the eyedropper. But the first thing that I need to do, so I've imported my Illustrator file. I already went through the process of cleaning up those files and making sure they're set up for me to animate. So I have a few different layers here for the eyedropper, for example. There's the eyedropper itself, which is, if I solo it, this is just like the outlines of it. I have a layer just for this drop here, some fill layers, and then, yeah, that liquid that's inside of it, which is also technically a fill layer, but it's more essential to this icon to have that fill layer than most other icons that have fills. For example, like this spine. It's nice to have, but it's not essential. So let me just unsolo all of those. It doesn't really work to have every layer soloed. So what I like to do in this case, again, I import these as compositions with layer size retained. And then what I do is I have my original, let me go up to the eyedropper here. I have my original composition so that if I ever need to go back to this, I have it and I don't have to worry about, the layers are in here, but if I drop them in, they're gonna not be lined up properly. So I like to keep a copy of the original composition and then another copy of that composition that I use specifically to convert to shapes. So I'll just select all of these and then right click. There's this option under create shapes from vector layer, and this has been an incredible tool for me to learn about in the past couple years. I used to hate shape layers and think that they were completely useless. And if I ever had to animate any kind of like mask or shape, I would use solid layers and then just create masks and do it that way. But then I started watching E.C. Abrams, his videos on YouTube, and he started talking about shape layers and different things that you can do with them. I think probably one of the first videos of his that I watched was about shape layers and the repeater effect, which my mind was blown after I watched that. And ever since then, now sometimes I'll use shape layers for things I would have definitely used solid layers for before, like creating a background. Sometimes I'll just make a shape layer that is just a rectangle and with a solid fill, and then I'll use that as my background instead of creating like going new solid and then going through the process of making a solid, because that way too I have more flexibility if I want to change it from a solid color to like a gradient and stuff like that. But that's kind of a little bit of a tangent here. So the first thing that I need to do after my layers have been converted to shape layers, I need to go through, and under contents you find where like all of your shape paths and fills and everything are. It's super important to go through and just double check and make sure that there hasn't been anything added. With these icon animations, that hasn't really been too much of an issue for me, because for the most part they're very simple, like fills in here. These are very simple shapes, and then a lot of times the lines, I do keep them as strokes, or if they were solid shapes in Illustrator, I'll recreate them as an open path with a stroke, because that can make it a lot easier to animate sometimes depending on what I'm trying to do. But in some of my other work with creating illustrations in Illustrator and then bringing those assets into After Effects to animate, sometimes what happens is, and especially if you start using things like the Pathfinder tools to like create shapes that have like holes in the center of them, when they become shape layers, when they get converted to shape layers, you'll find that there might be multiple paths that are created and merge groups and stuff like that. You just want to go through and clean that stuff up. Again, I think I talked about this in the video that I uploaded last week, I think, going over my animation process with the round 3 icons. But the reason why cleaning it up can be so important is because if you're using shape layers and then doing animations that are going to be exported with the, if I go up here, the body moving plugin, which I don't know which screen this is going to come up on. Okay, over here. So this plugin allows you to render out any of your compositions in After Effects as JSON files. Now, there are limitations to that. The animation has to be done with shape layers, and no effects are compatible with Lottie, which is Airbnb's like, I don't know what you call it. It's by Airbnb, but Lottie allows you to display these JSON files on the web in apps and stuff like that. So it's a very easy way to get nice SVG animations that are more complex than you can really code by hand. So with Lottie, certain things like effects, so if I added any of these effects over here, not compatible with Lottie. certain things like merge paths within shape layers, not compatible with Lottie. Track mats, not compatible. So, or some of these things might be compatible, but only with certain devices. And so that's something that you have to be careful about when you're trying to do these kinds of animations. And definitely if you're trying to have an animation that you're going to put up on the web or in an app and you want it to be a pretty low file size, then it's definitely important to go through and make sure you're like cleaning up all of your layers, all of the shape layers, any paths that you have too. This is part of what I do when I'm like preparing the files in Illustrator, is I'll go through and make sure, do I not have like 500 curve points on this path when I really only need like 2? Because that's also going to affect not only the way that your path animates, if you're going in and actually animating the path itself rather than just the entire layer, but it's also going to affect, you know, how many points there are is going to add to that file size in the end. So I went through all of these, cleaned them up. What I like to do is also just kind of color code them a little bit to give myself a better idea of like which layer is which. So I just like to, sometimes it's kind of random what colors I give them. Sometimes it's just like what I'm feeling. Let's do I'll keep it with the nuns. This is going to be it's the same color as that, so I'll keep it there. Okay, so this is all cleaned up. The next thing that I like to do is I drop my null in here. And the reason why I'm bringing in a null right now, I'm just going to reset the anchor points to 0 so that way it's in the center of where my icon is. The reason why I bring in a null at this point is that I'm going to copy these layers. So rather than duplicating this composition again to start my animation, sometimes I do that, but I already have, I think, maybe I don't already have them set up yet. I'm just going to duplicate one of the other compositions that I worked on earlier. This was the eraser version 2. I'll play a little bit of it for you. Yeah, cool. Okay, so I'm gonna rename this here. We're going eyedropper version 1. Cool. Okay, then what I can do is just delete all that, everything except for my background layer, which is locked, which again, this is a shape layer. So that's what I like to do, is just create like a shape layer. I actually have a few different ones here because when I was originally doing these icons, I wasn't sure what color I wanted the background to be. And I had a couple that were custom icons. But anyway, now I'll paste all of those layers in. So make sure when you're copy pasting that it's basically whichever one you select, whichever layer you select first will end up being the top layer when you paste it. It's kind of counterintuitive in a way. I think I always, when I was first starting out, I always wanted to go from the bottom to the top. But you'll see if I do it that way, then it goes backwards. So now I'll do it backwards again. Alright, so I've got everything in there correctly. So the reason why I bring the null in is that the icons, the Illustrator files, the icons are very tiny. And I always forget that the null layers have full opacity when you bring them in, when you drag them in, rather than creating new ones. I hate that. But anyway, the Illustrator files are really tiny. So I don't know exactly what size they are. Let's check. If I go back to my shapes composition, we're at 48 pixels by 48 pixels. That is very small. And my compositions that I've been creating these animations in are 500 by 500. So I bring the null layer in just so that I can move everything and scale it appropriately. So I just am going to actually want the null layer position to be 250 by 250. And then I'm just gonna scale it up, and I already have in these compositions, because I've been duplicating them, I already have some grid guides set up. So that way I know, like, I don't want my icon animation to go past this outer edge here. I mean, some of them do. For example, if we go back to, I know this one definitely does. If we go to like my first version of the eraser, obviously I have stuff going on and off the screen, so it is going to go past that at some point. I just don't want my final static icon to be outside of that box there. So I just like to scale it, but sometimes I have to readjust because I'm not always sure how much space the actual animation needs. And for this one, I am gonna have to create my own shape layer in here, as I have this pool of color coming in. Or it'll already be there. I don't know yet if I want to animate it in or just have it the way it is. If you guys have any suggestions, let me know. Sometimes I just like to start animating and feel things out, you know? Okay, so we've got this in here and sized up to this is a pretty good size for this icon. So I am going to come up here to so this is my shape tool. I'm gonna select ellipse, and I'm just gonna double click. So that's gonna create a new shape layer with this ellipse on it. I actually do want there to be a fill. I don't want that color. That color is very ugly. But I'm going to keep it for now. I'm actually just going to delete this stroke on here too, because I don't need it. And then under the ellipse path, I'm going to edit the size here. So I unlocked that because I don't want it to be a full circle. I want it to actually, okay, here's the thing. Sometimes there are like multiple ways to edit the same kind of information for a particular object. So this path, for example, ellipses have options for size and position. Sometimes other more custom shape layers will just have path, a rectangle or rounded rectangle might also have size and position. But if I edit the position from here, that changes. Well, this is showing the anchor point for the entire layer. But if I can get it onto just the path. Okay. So you see the anchor point here is also centered. But if I start moving this position from underneath ellipse path, then the anchor point stays in the center of my composition. The anchor point stays exactly where it was, and just the ellipse moves. So basically what happens in that case, if I then wanted to come in and rotate just this ellipse, it's rotating based on that anchor point, which is where it was originally. So if I want to move this down, but I still want it to rotate from the center of the ellipse, then what I really need to do is under ellipse, instead of changing the value of position that's underneath path, I need to do it from under transform. So that way, you know, that anchor point stays the same. And now if I rotate, boom, boom, boom. I'm not going to rotate it. In this instance, there's not really any need for me to actually keep it in the center there. I just like to do it out of habit. And then Then if I wanted to animate it more later on, and again, I might have some scaling going on. If I want to animate it later on, then it makes it a lot easier for me to do that, because I already have the anchor point set where I need it to be. Okay, so I still need to change this fill color. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to choose the same color here as what's inside of the eyedropper, and then the little drop itself, because that's supposed to be where the eyedroppers, this circle is supposed to be where the eyedropper is getting that liquid from. So I have that set up. I think the circle is a pretty good size for right now, so I'll leave that. I'm going to hide that real quick just so I can see here. I'm going to hide some of these layers that are not totally essential, or for example, so right now these are all still connected to my null layer, which I do like to keep the null layers on there even if I don't use them again. I might use it later. For this one, I don't think I will, but I usually just keep them in there anyway. You could definitely just delete this, and then it doesn't really hurt anything. Everything that was scaled up is still at that scaled size. Okay, so I just hid the liquid drop layer because I don't need to worry about that right now, and I don't want it to get in my way. What I'm gonna do with some of these fills, this liquid one I could also hide for right now, but I'm going to select all three of my fill layers here. So the fill of the tube, the fill of the top of the eyedropper, and then the liquid itself. And I'm gonna take the little swirly icon for parenting, and instead of keeping them parented to the null, I'm gonna parent them to my eyedropper layer, which is, again, that's just the outlines of it. But this layer is going to be the one that I'm actually moving and animating. So that way, as this is moving, as it's rotating, I don't have to worry about also keying those values for each of these other layers. So I'm gonna set my keyframes for position and rotation on the eyedropper, because I know that, looking at my storyboard again, I want this to come from the top of the screen, and it's gonna be in a totally vertical position, and then eventually it'll rotate into where it needs to be at the end. This, I don't know, looks like 45 degrees or whatever. Technically it's 0 degrees in my layer because this is just its default position. But yeah, I'm gonna set that position and rotation, and that's totally fine right there the way it is. So I'm just gonna place it somewhere a little bit further into my timeline. I'm not worrying about the exact timing just yet. What I want to do is just start to work backwards a little bit. So we'll have that rotation there. And good old autosave. Okay, so I want to move this over a little bit because if you can see, it's just a little bit off from the center of the composition, and the positions here is 0. I'm gonna do 0, 0. I don't know if that's exactly where I want it right now, but I'm gonna leave it because I do need this to come down into the circle here and kind of squeeze up some stuff. Now, this might be an instance, and I kind of ran into this with the eraser as well when I was I worked on this animation this morning. I'll show you this one too, and let me make it a little bit bigger. So I was working on this one this morning, and I have the eraser coming in and like removing pieces of this circle. Now, one of the things that I mentioned a little while ago is that track mats do not work with Lottie, are not compatible with Lottie, or at least are not compatible across all devices when using Lottie. So that's something that I wouldn't be able to animate it the way that I did here if I was using Lottie, because I ended up copying the position keyframes from my eraser layer into a path on a shape layer, which I have called erase path. And I just gave that a stroke and then added it's not going to show it, trim paths tool to this layer. So that way, as the eraser is moving, this path is drawing on with trim paths. And I have it set so that my circle layer underneath is referencing that path and using it as an inverted track map. So basically, anywhere that this path is showing, don't show this circle. That's how I had it set up excuse me, for this particular animation. And again, if I was using Lottie, I would have to think of a different way to do that, because track mats are something that don't work properly. I might have to do something similar with this one, since I kind of want this eyedropper tool to maybe disappear into the circle. Maybe I won't end up doing that. We'll see. But that's my first thought, is what I ideally would like to have is this eyedropper comes down, and then wherever I feel like this would be, probably about here, the surface of this kind of pool of color, wherever that the top of that surface would be, I would want to have the eyedropper disappear below that. So that would typically, I would use a track map for that kind of thing. I could possibly get away with just creating another shape layer and adding it on top of the eyedropper, so that way it's covering everything. That might be the best way to go about it, and then that would still allow you to export this animation and use it with Lottie like normal. That is just another decision I'll make when I get to that point. But for now, because, it's good to prepare for this kind of stuff and to do as much of the preparation work up front as you can. So that way, as you're animating, things can go a lot smoother and you don't really have to worry about figuring things out as you go. You can pretty much follow. That's why I do these storyboards. So that way I'm not sitting here in After Effects and trying to decide what I want to do and decide how I want it to look. And then probably I would take like an hour to animate something and then hate it and then never release it. But by doing these little storyboards, things are going to change from this, but I at least have an idea of the general like process that I need to go through to animate this icon in one way or another. And I can use this when I'm preparing my files in Illustrator to help me figure out, like, oh yeah, I wanted to do this thing, so I need to set up this layer in this way so I can use that thing, like trim paths, or I want this to rotate but this to stay still. So figuring out all that stuff beforehand is so important. But sometimes there are things that are less important for you to figure out beforehand. Like, I know that if I know that I want this to disappear below the surface of this eyedropper, of the pool of color, I don't necessarily need to have that figured out from the very start. Sometimes you can wing things a little. It's just a matter of like having the experience of doing this enough times that you know what you can wing and what you can't. And I will admit that probably I'm not an expert on that yet either. So I might, be like eating my own words later. But I think for now it should be okay. That's the nice thing too about doing a project like this, which is more of a personal project, is that I want to, do these in a timely manner and use them to improve things like my pacing of how quickly I can animate things and stuff like that. But there's no like absolute deadline from like a client. No one is like relying on me to have these done. So it takes some of that pressure out. This is a learning experience for me, and it's a chance for me to experiment with certain things and try certain things that I might not try in other scenarios because I'm worried about time or because I haven't done it before and I'm not sure that it'll look good for the first time that I do it. So let's see. What do I want to start with? Okay. So I know that I want this to come from the top of the screen, so I'm just going to go back a little bit. Right now, I just have those two sets of keyframes. So I'm going to pull back a little bit more and just bring this all the way up to the top of the frame. So it's just barely outside of the composition. And then I'm just gonna play it. Let's see how that works. Cool. Obviously, what I'm gonna need to do is I'm gonna cut that keyframe so I still have it copied onto my clipboard. I'm just gonna set 2 new keyframes down here and then repaste that other keyframe. So that way what I have comes from the top of the screen down into the pool and then waits a little bit and then does that rotation, because I'm gonna want it to sit down here for a little while, obviously a lot longer than that. But I just want to make sure that I get that in there, and I'll just select those earlier keyframes, pull them back a little bit. Okay, so I have this coming down from the top and then sucking up the color and then rotating, and then the little liquid drops gonna have to come out probably around here. So I might take that layer, even though I still have it hidden, I might just take it and then I'm gonna hit the little square bracket, the left bracket on my keyboard to move the layer start to my playhead position. Cool. It's looking pretty good. Okay. So I definitely want this to start a lot earlier. And so, okay. Before I was talking about how, you need to like prepare stuff and everything. This is an instance where this particular layer here, this liquid that is inside of my eyedropper, I'm gonna need this to animate up here. Probably what I'll do, again, if I'm not concerned at all about using Lottie, then I would just use a track matte for this. So basically just keep this shape layer here the way it is, and then use another layer, probably a solid, to just kind of move up against this shape, and then do the track matte. So that way all of this stuff out here would be hidden and you would just see this shape being filled. But I'm not trying to use track mats, so I'm going to animate the actual path itself, which I think won't be too difficult in here. It's a little bit of like a a more complex shape than just a square, but it's not too complex. The thing that gets challenging is trying to figure out the kind of pacing of it, the timing of everything. But I can start off simple and just make some keyframes that just kind of match where some of the other keyframes are. And okay, so this is something that is a little frustrating when it comes to doing these animations, because often I'm using something that is rotated in the end, but that rotated, again, like I mentioned before. So this eyedropper is rotated in its final position, but technically that's a 0 rotation for this layer, because this is just its default rotation. So when it's in this position, although it looks like the eyedropper is rotated, if you move any of these points up and down or left to right, they will move accordingly with like the composition, how you would expect. So up will move toward the top of the composition, down will move toward the bottom, left to the left, and right to the right. But as I come back here, in this area of the timeline, my layer here is rotated. It has negative 45-degree rotation on it. So as you'll see, as I go to try to move any of these points here, I'm hitting the right key on my keyboard, and it's going up and to the right in a diagonal, because for this layer, that is the right direction. And you'll see my bounding box for these points is, it looks to be like in a diamond shape because it's rotated. So that can be a little frustrating sometimes, because it makes it a little more difficult to move things around as you would expect them to be in something that's upright like this. But again, it's not the end of the world. It's pretty easy to still deal with it. And I just went in and used my Convert Vertex tool to remove some of the curves that were coming from the anchor points that were up higher in the shape that I've moved down, just so we don't get any funky business like the fill coming outside of the actual eyedropper itself. So I'm just going to keep going, and I think for this last one, I'm just going to move everything down. I don't really need too many more frames to manage. So now as I play it forward, we have that sort of fill. And again, I haven't timed anything yet, so let's preview that. Okay, that's not too bad actually. I think that the pace of this is okay, but I do want to like stretch it out a little bit. So I can select all those keyframes, and if I hold down my Alt key and then click on this last frame and just drag it out a little bit, that's going to kind of scale the time between the keyframes proportionally. Cool. I'm going to leave that as it is for right now. I think what I'll want to do is give it a little more character and maybe, change up the pacing of how quickly it starts versus how quickly it stops. But for right now, just going to watch it again. This is most of my time spent animating, is just rewatching stuff. Cool. And I think that what I'm going to do right now, I'm just going to take this rotation keyframe where it's still at negative 45 degrees, but then it starts to move. The next keyframe after that is my 0 position. I'm just going to move it ahead in the timeline a little bit, so that way what I actually have is the eyedropper starting to move back upward before rotating. Cool. And again, I'm gonna definitely need to adjust these keyframes and the timing and everything. And I'll go in and mess with the graph editor and kind of some of my paths here. But that's for a little bit later. I think that at this point, I'm gonna unsolo those 2 layers, those 3 layers. I think at this point it might be good to see, okay. Yeah, this is coming along pretty well so far. One thing that I want to do right now, and I'm gonna do it, because there's nothing holding me back from doing it. I think this is a good width for this circle, but I want to make it a little bit shorter. So 110, that's a pretty good size. And then I'm going to move it down a bit too. That way there's more of the eyedropper that's visible than the pool, because I don't really need that pool to be too visible. So one thing I'm thinking about right now, if I go back to my storyboards, and I'll actually show you in the second iteration where we have the square instead of a circle and the eyedropper comes out of the top of the square. You can see what I have here. I've noted that I want the square to be moving down the frame as well, down the screen, to basically give the appearance of like this eyedropper is coming out of the square and we're following the eyedropper with the camera as it moves up. But when it comes to this first iteration, I didn't really make any note of that, if I want to have that happen in the same way, or if I want this eyedropper to basically be sucking up like all of the color that is inside of this little circle here. So I might do that, and then that could be interesting as well for how to handle having something over the top of this. Because what I'm thinking is, basically, let's try it. As this, okay, let me hide some of my keyframes here. As this liquid is coming up, what I want to have in my circle layer, I'm going to, under ellipse transform, I'm going to keyframe my scale. So I'll keep it at 100% up until the liquid layer, until the path starts to animate. And then when we get to that final keyframe for the liquid path, I'm going to either, okay, well, actually, let me go back and undo that a little bit. So I was talking about the anchor position a long time ago. Feels like forever ago now. The anchor point for the ellipse is in the center of the ellipse now, and it's that way because rather than changing the value of the position underneath the ellipse path, I changed the position value under the ellipse transform. So now this ellipse is exactly where I want it to be on the screen. I don't want to move it from where it is, but as I have this scaling animation, you can see that it's not doing exactly what I want. I want it to look like this eyedropper is sucking up that color. And so for the most part, like, this is looking pretty good. But then as it gets smaller and smaller, you can see that the center point is above where the bottom of the eyedropper is. So it doesn't look right. So if we go back to too big. Go back to 100% for that. I don't need to go back to 100% technically, but I'm going to, just to make it a little easier. What I'm going to do is select my little, I always forget what this is called. It's one of the camera tools. It's Y on the keyboard. But this will let me select that anchor point, and maybe the anchor points with the shape layers like this, with the actual paths, are a little finicky because they're so small. Like if I go to just the layer itself, you'll see that this anchor point is much bigger. And if I hide my guides, it makes it a little easier to select as well. This point's much bigger and much easier to move around. But the anchor point for the actual path is a lot smaller and can very easily be hidden sometimes. So I've got that moved to the bottom. Now as I lower this scale, it's starting to do more of what I wanted it to do. So yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. I don't know how believable it is that all of that, this entire circle, is only that much of the eyedropper. So I might, looking at this here, it's 69.6. That's a pretty good number, huh? So I just set a keyframe here because I like the width of this circle where it is now. I feel like that is more justifiable to say this whole circle is all of that liquid. So I set a keyframe where I want my new size to start, but I'm going to go back to my first keyframe and then just delete that and then click on it again. And the reason that works is because I don't have any other keyframes before this, so it's not doing any kind of interpolation between two keyframes. So when I remove the old keyframe and set this new one, it's going to be the exact same value as my next keyframe that I had here. And then this one that I set in between, I can just remove that. So now I have my normal animation. Perfect. I could have also just moved the other keyframe to the correct position, or like copy pasted it. But I don't know. Sometimes I just like to do it that way with deleting old keyframes and adding new ones. Definitely, this is one of those areas where it's like there's no one way to do it. There's a ton of ways to do it. Okay, so this is starting to shape up pretty well, I think. I definitely want to adjust some of the timing here, especially after the liquid gets sucked up. Now I have too much space that's kind of waiting between this and the movement of it. Not too much. I think maybe like 5 frames or so I would probably move it back. But first, let me watch it again and think, what part do I want to tackle first here? And what is still missing? We need to remember the liquid drop. But I think I'm going to touch that last because it's going to be a lot easier for me to get the rest of everything else kind of how I want it to be and then worry about that later. Because it really is kind of like the afterthought of the icon. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to start with that first, I think, and just go, yeah, so this is where the liquid path stops animating. So we're at about 1 second and 18 frames in, and I'm animating this at 30 frames per second, so just about a second and a half. And then just after 2 seconds is where this eyedropper starts to move up and then rotates a little bit after. So what I'll do is, so this is about half a second, I'm gonna try to drop it down to like 1/4 of a second. And then watch it and see how's that. So that's looking a lot better. I think it's looking a lot better anyway. Okay. Going down. Dun, dun, dun. And definitely this rotation here feels very stiff. Feels kind of like I set 4 keyframes and let the computer do the work. So what I might do to kind of give this a little more character, make it a little more lively, instead of it feels like an issue with the rotation. It feels like you can tell that it's just rotating on a center point. But what I'm actually going to manipulate is my position. And I'm going to change the path of it. Now, this is something I've been running into, especially a lot in the past couple of days, as I'm trying to manipulate the path for the position of this shape layer. When I go into my little convert vertex tool, this looks like it's gonna be okay. All right, see, this time it's working correctly as I want it to work. I don't know if this is the way that I need this to move, but we're gonna try it. Sometimes what'll happen, is that even though I have the convert vertex tool selected, and even though I have my position selected down here, sometimes it'll still show me as if I'm trying to add a point to my path or manipulate points on my path for the shape and not for the position. So that can be kind of frustrating. Sometimes what I end up having to do is like move my playhead to a point in the timeline where that shape layer is not in the same position as where my path is, and then I can manipulate it this way and not have to worry about that. Let me watch this. See what's up. Okay, that didn't really do much. My curve didn't really do too much. I think it didn't hurt it. It definitely looks a little bit better, but not as good as I want it to look. So what I'll do is I'm gonna set my playhead at just about the center here of where the 2 keyframes here are, my 2 position keyframes. So I'm gonna set it there. I'm gonna set a new keyframe. I'm gonna try to bring it up a little bit higher and see if I can manipulate it this way. We'll try this. Nope, I didn't want that one to move. So I'm going to use my selection tool instead of the convert vertex tool. Although that's still kind of moving that a little bit. What I need to do is watch this and just see, is anything messing up? Yes, it is messing up. So I'm going to undo and then rewatch this. Okay. I'm going to try going this way with it. Nope. Sometimes you have to like really zoom in to get a good idea of what's happening. I'm actually going to remove that. This is where it gets tricky too, when you have two keyframes that are in the same position. Sometimes After Effects will use this continuous Bezier for the spatial interpolation when all you want is linear. Because then what happens is you have an area where you want your position to remain static, but because it uses that continuous Bezier for the path, it'll start to move a little bit from where it's at in this space in between, and I don't want that. So if I move it back to linear, then we're good. Okay, see, this is good. This is more of what I wanted. I wanted to kind of come back and up and then over. I think I can still exaggerate this a little bit more and maybe even bring some of these points up a little bit. Maybe bring this out even more. I can probably use my Convert Vertex tool for that. It's kind of similar to something that I did with the eraser earlier, except that I didn't have to make it work. I didn't have to work so hard to make it look the way I wanted it to. But you can see in this area where I'm going from, again, kind of a similar concept where I have this eraser in one position and with a certain value on the rotation, and I'm trying to get it to rotate while it's moving into the other position. And so for this one, for the eraser, yeah, it ends up with this little like back and forth action happening before it gets to where I need it to be in the end. So it's going to be kind of a similar animation going on with this one. Yeah, that's looking good to me. I think that what needs to happen is a little bit of offsetting the rotation here, and that maybe that will help. It might be that I need to offset it so the rotation stops before the position. Yeah, I think that looks okay. There's still something that feels off about it to me. I'm gonna pull this back more and pull this to the right a little bit to match a little more of the diagonal of the eyedropper. That might make it look worse, but we'll see. No, I think that looks okay, because now it's kind of like it's being brought up and then pushed over. Cool. I'm digging this. I still want to exaggerate this a little bit more though. And I'm actually going to bring this up. Okay. Let's move that out a little bit further for the position. It's a little bit too far. I'm going to want to go into my graph editor soon too and kind of smooth certain things out. I think the last thing I want to do first, that makes sense. I just have the rotation going from 45 to 0, but it needs a little bit of follow through, I think, is maybe something that will improve this. So rather than going from 45 to 0 and stopping, I'm actually going to make it go a little bit over 0. So we're going from negative 45. I'm going to do like 4 or so and then have it come back to 0. Let's see how that looks. Okay, not bad. I think that actually what I want to do, I'm going to try this. So moving it, I'm going to have it go from negative 45 to 0. But then what I'll do, instead of it going to a positive value right then, I will Let me think about this. Yeah. We'll go to just about 4 after, or just as soon as it gets to its final position, and then back to 0. Let me look at that. Yeah, it looks weird. So I'm going to take out this 0 keyframe in between and see if this looks better. Somewhat. I think for this to work, might actually need more of a negative value for the rotation first. Yeah, okay. I mean, that looks horrendous. I want to be clear. That's terrible right now, but that's more of the feel that I want it to have. So, what do we need to do to make this look good? If I go slow, it looks okay. This is still a pretty big jump. And I think rather than just having it just go positive and then to 0, I'm going to have it go positive and then go back a little bit more negative. How did that happen? Okay. It's too much, but that's the kind of feeling that I want it to have. So I'm gonna do like -5. It's probably just gonna need to be a lot smaller. Okay, that's not too bad. I think I will do -3 instead, since we had the positive value as 4. I might need to actually make that a little longer. Okay, that's starting to look a lot better. So I have it coming up and then going into that. There's something in this part that, okay, I think I know what can help with this. And that's going to be what my next phase was anyway, which is starting to go through and adding in, because right now you can see, let me just make sure I get all of my keyframes out here. You can see all of my keyframes. I have no easing on any of these yet. They're all just the normal plain keyframes. So what I want to do is go through and figure out which keyframes I want to add some easing on. And that'll help me smooth out certain things and figure out where I still need to go in and manipulate the graph editor. So I'm going to start with this keyframe right here, this position. I'm going to F9 that, and then so that way it'll ease up and then kind of slow down as it starts to move again. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Again, only looking at the position of it and not a lot of the other animation. Some of it looks bad, but that's just the process of animating, in my experience. This rotation also needs to have an ease in on it. So I put the ease, just a normal ease on the position keyframe, so it's easing in and out. Yeah, but with this rotation, it's just easing in. So it kind of acts as like an anticipation as the eyedropper is slowing down on the up. It starts to slow into the rotation, and then you get kind of, even though it's still moving, you get kind of the feeling of it like holding for a second before it starts to move. And I might I might end up converting, I'm going to convert this to just a full ease. I'm going to see what it looks like right now. But the main reason I do that is because I'm going to ease these as well where it's swinging. And then for the final position, I pretty much always do this. If something's moving, for the final position, I want that to ease. And sometimes it's enough just to set the ease on a keyframe and have it look like you want it to look. All right. And you can see already how much just adding a few eases on my keyframes has improved the animation so much. It looks so much smoother now than it ever did before. All right, so I'm trying to think, do I want to keep adding? Yeah, let's do that. I'm gonna add some more eases. I really don't need this rotation keyframe actually, because I don't have any rotation happening until this point. So I'm gonna remove that keyframe so I don't have to worry about it. I added in my ease to where the eyedropper stops in the pool. And then I will add an ease out where it starts to lift up again. Cool. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna see if I can use that. It doesn't work. Okay. It might be a little tricky with adding it to my circle and the liquid here. But I'm gonna try it. Easing in and out at the beginning and ending points. Okay. That works pretty well. I'm definitely gonna have to go into the graph editor on that and keep manipulating it. But I like it so far. I think I'm actually also going to shorten the amount of time that the eyedropper spends falling. Or actually, I'm gonna undo that, because I definitely do. This is something that I want to manipulate in the graph editor, because I want it to be a little faster in the beginning and then slow down as it comes in. I don't know if this is exactly how I want it to happen. I think that it's looking pretty good. I might actually come into the start here and do that. I might decrease a little bit of the slowness. Nope. Actually liked the way it was before. Okay. Now what I'm feeling is I do need to bring this keyframe ahead a little bit just to speed that up. Bring this back. Okay. I think that's pretty good. I might still adjust a little bit. Okay, I don't know about you, but every time I play this, I can hear this little like slurping noise in my head as the liquid gets sucked up. It's a little grotesque, but you don't have to hear it. So, I mean, unless you do hear it, let me know. Do you hear sound when you watch GIFs or animations that don't have sound? Like if you've ever seen the little Eiffel Tower, or well, they're not Eiffel Towers. I think they're just phone towers. that are like jumping rope and you hear like the thud as it goes through. In any case, here we go. All right. So I want to manipulate the graph for both my liquid path and the ellipse scale. So I'm going to select them at the same time. This is going to be tricky because I have these two keyframes in between for just the path and not the circle. But let's see how that looks. I added in a little bit to that. Okay, not bad. I think what I need to do is stretch this second keyframe in between. I need to move it ahead a little bit. Ooh, not that much. Okay, not too bad. I'm also wondering in this here, so I'm going to select my liquid layer so that I can watch as the path scales up, just to see, is it moving in a way that would allow me to, I don't think so, but I'm going to try it. I'm going to try deleting this keyframe. Yeah, and you can see it doesn't really work because it's no longer following the edges that I need it to follow. So I'm just gonna have to live with it being a little weird. Because what happens is it starts to move at a good rate and then the rate changes as it gets there. So maybe I can move that keyframe a little bit ahead. I'm okay with that. The last part is to look at this ending here, which I think is going pretty well, just with having just added the eases. I think what I might want to do is just this part where it comes up. Just go in and manipulate this so that way it's slowing into it a little bit more for the rotation. Yeah. I like that. And then I might also move this out a little bit. I kind of think for this bottom part, I think it was a little bit better before. Not bad. And then we can drag this out a little bit too, so that way it kind of gets that slow in, starts to move fast, and then it slows down even more as it actually comes to where it's supposed to be. Nice. I'm liking this so far. I think I'm going to go back to this spot here and actually bring the rotation a little further into the negative. Oh, 74 might be a little too much. I think I had it at 70 before. Let's just do negative 70. Yeah, I like that. It gives it a little more exaggeration, a little more anticipation before it starts to move forward. And because I now have that more dramatic move a little faster in the rotation, I think having a more exaggerated rotation beforehand kind of helps with that. Whoosh. So I'm pretty happy with how this is looking. So I think it's time to, get into this last part here, which is the drop. I know I did also talk about wanting to cover this little bit of the eyedropper, but I honestly think that it's better to have it just open like this, especially since we changed the size of this circle to or this ellipse to be a little shorter, to kind of give it more of an angle, so that way it's not ever going to look like the eyedropper is really too deep under the surface. It kind of is just skimming the top. And so I think it's okay to leave out having that eyedropper look like it falls underneath the surface for this instance. So now what I'm gonna do is figure out this drop. So I know one thing for sure is that I will want to set like a position here just so that I have it. I might set a rotation on this. I might actually, before I start to key anything, go ahead and take my I think it's called move behind tool. Just move my anchor point to the very tip of this, just in case I need to do any rotation. I think that's where I want it to be rotating from. And what I'm thinking is that maybe as the eyedropper is moving, like maybe about here is where this will start to come from. So I might just do that. I have a feeling I'm gonna want some scaling in here, and I'll probably mess with the path a little bit too. But if we just scale it, I'm trying to picture how this should look. It's gonna be kind of weird. This isn't really gonna look super realistic, but I think it doesn't look terrible either. I think it just needs some tweaking. Again, kind of the same problem as when I first started animating the eyedropper, is that it's a little stiff because we just have these two position points, and neither of them are, see, there it goes. I'm trying to manipulate the path and it for the position, and it goes off of the path for the actual shape. I want to give the position path a little bit of curve to it, so it's not just moving very linearly, because that's one of the things, if you look at the world around you, almost nothing moves in a linear fashion. Everything is arcs. Everything is moving in some weird kind of arc, and that already improved it a lot, just having that small bit of curve to the position path. But it's not quite what I want for the rotation. And I think that I might end up doing a similar thing as we did with the eyedropper, and kind of rotating it in a way that you wouldn't, that the computer is not going to think to rotate it. That might be a little too much. Or I might want to move that out a little bit. I don't really want to add the same kind of like secondary animation on the drop that I have as I do on the eyedropper, because that's not super realistic, but I might throw some in anyway. So let's just see how it looks. I'm going to copy this last keyframe and just paste it a little bit further ahead, and we're going to change this to ease in and out. And instead of it being at 0, what was the last value that I had? -12. So I'm going to do a little bit of a positive value. Let's do like 3. Okay, yeah, that definitely makes it look a little smoother. Again, this isn't like logical. This is not, that part of the animation doesn't really make sense for like physics and reality, but it looks pretty decent. And sometimes that's what's important in animation, that it looks okay. Cool. So I like that. I think what the very last thing I'm going to do with this liquid drop is just go in and add a little bit of animation to the path, so that when we're in about this phase here, and I might keep the path normal at first. Well, never mind. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is select these bottom points here and just move them and maybe rotate them a little bit and try to kind of give this drop a shape that suggests that it's a very that's a very fluid object. See, that's a little too much. I can see if pulling the keyframe back will help a little bit with that, but I also might have just exaggerated it a little too much. So I'm gonna pull this back a little bit, pull this back a little bit. Let's see if that helps. Okay. You might also move the end keyframe forward a little bit more, so once it gets to about there. I think that looks pretty good. That way it feels like it's kind of moving through the air. Again, for it to just stop where it is doesn't really make sense. If this was any other animation, I would probably animate it like flying off, but I can't do that because this is what the final icon looks like. Okay. So at this point, I feel like I'm good with the way that this icon's looking. My next step after this, usually what I do is do one animation, then leave it, and then do the other one, and then come back and see if there are things that I want to change. That way, you know, it's always good to get some room from an animation after you do it. It can get into your brain after a while, so you need to just like take a step back, take a breather, do something else, and then come back to it with semi-fresh eyes, and you'll be able to see more of like maybe some things that are bothering me right now. Maybe they won't bother me as much later. Maybe I'll find something that I'm like that I missed earlier that should definitely be fixed. So that's normally what I would do, and take my little eyedropper V1, duplicate it so I have V2, and then when I open this up, sometimes what I'll do is look and see, is there anything in the next animation that I'll want to have some of these keyframes for. I don't think so for this one. I think I'd just prefer to reset everything. But sometimes I'll do that. I'll see, oh, this drop is going to come in the same way in the next one, so I may as well keep the keyframes for that, which honestly might be true, but right now I'm just going to select all my layers, bring them back to the beginning, and then I'll move all the way to the end and just remove all of my keyframes. So that way I'm good and ready to start that second iteration. But I think that this has been enough for today. For me, I know this one animation took me a little bit longer, just about as long as doing some of the other ones for this round took me, but I guess I wasn't also talking during those or rambling. But I'll show you real quick the other two. I've already run through the eraser animations that I did, but these are the drawing tablet ones as well. I'm actually pretty pleased with how they came out. All right. So that's the first one, and then here's the second one. I had a lot of fun doing these two because you get to kind of play with that concept of drawing things on, but not just because, for example, in this eraser 2, I have the eraser kind of drawing on to an extent, but it's like drawing itself on. And that tends to be the majority of my animations that have that kind of effect. So it was fun to play with something like this where I have another object that's drawing something else on. And this one too, you can see I have a lot of keyframes in my position. This one involved a lot of copying the paths from the shapes and pasting them as position and then manipulating it from there. So that way, that makes it a lot easier if you're doing this kind of thing, because now what I have is, instead of rough approximations and trying to figure out, when this pen layer should be down at the bottom, when it should be at this point, and trying to match it up that way, basically I have a start point, the start of the path, and I have an end point, the end of the path. And the path itself has trim layers, trim path on it. So basically I set my start position for the path at the start position for the trim path, and then end position at the end position, and everything lines up perfectly, and I don't have to worry about, oh no, the pen's 1 pixel over in this frame. Everything lines up perfectly. And then I do the same thing with the inside screen and then the final line itself. So yeah, that was definitely fun to play with. I might try to incorporate more of that stuff in other animations I do in the future. So that's going to be all for today. This has gone on a little bit longer than I expected it to, but that's fine. I want to thank everyone who came for watching, and if you enjoyed watching me animate, please let me know if you have suggestions for things you'd like to see, or improvements that I can make to my live streaming. Please let me know. This is the very first live stream I've ever done. I think it went pretty okay, but always looking to improve. So thank you again for coming. I will let you guys know in the future when I'm going to live stream again, hopefully with a lot more warning beforehand. I think I posted about this 15 minutes before I decided to do it, 20 minutes before I decided to do it. But yeah, I'll definitely make it known when I decide to live stream again. Maybe I will do, I still have 3 animations to do for this round, and then one final round for the icon animations, round 5, which actually only has 2 icons. I think one of them is a blueprint visual design and blueprint and pencil. Those ones are going to be a little more challenging. Well, definitely the blueprint. It's going to be a little bit more challenging. So maybe that'll be fun to do a live stream when I get to those. And then I'll be done with this icon animation project. It's been a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun doing it, and it's definitely been a good experience for me in not only, continuing to practice my animation in After Effects, but also getting some more experience in making my videos, even though I have, decent experience with making videos anyway, but for like this type of context, I haven't really done that much, like talking about my storyboarding process, talking about my animation, and then this live streaming, me actually working on animation, is a little nerve-wracking, but yeah, I've learned a lot already doing this process. So absolutely, I would totally recommend if you want to get into doing icon animations, definitely look into, I'm going to bring this up. If you Google Design Tools Icon Pack by Envision and VectEasy, this is the pack of icons that I've been working from. You obviously don't have to use these, and it's not like this is in no way related to Envision or VectEasy. It's just an icon pack that I had, and it's free to use, so you don't have to worry about that. So that's why I thought it would be perfect to do these kind of icon animations for, because it can be hard to create the icons and then animate them at the same time, especially if what you're interested in is more of the animation rather than illustration. So if you can find an icon pack like this to download, and just get started in working with that in After Effects, converting to shape layers, and then working with your shape layers, I would highly recommend that. The other thing that you can look into is the body movement plugin, and Lottie. This is lottiefiles.com, so this is where like people upload their Lottie animations, and you can preview your Lottie animations when you do them. So you can see people make like all these different things here. So this is a great place to look for inspiration and to see what other people are doing, how other people are producing their icon animations. If that's something that you're interested in getting into, definitely recommend checking that out. This is lottiefiles.com, and these are all just people who have uploaded their own icons and icon animations to this site. Yeah, that's enough rambling for me. Thank you one last time to everyone who stopped by and watched, and I hope to see you again next time. Have a great day. Peace out.